Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be diving into something I know you all care about: how technology shapes our world. You've given us a great starting point, excerpts from Power and Progress by Daron Acemoglu and Simon Johnson.
Yeah, we're talking big picture stuff here, not just the latest iPhone or anything. We're talking the forces that have been shaping societies for centuries.
Exactly. Now, this book is dense. It's a lot to take in. But don't worry, that's our job. We're here to distill those key insights so you can walk away feeling like you just had an amazing conversation about this stuff, not like you sat through a college lecture, right?
From what we understand, you're really interested in how technology, from medieval inventions all the way to AI, determines who gets ahead and who gets left behind.
Exactly. And the authors, they get right to it, challenging this idea we have that technological progress is automatically good for everyone. Like we all just jump on this progress train and it takes us to a better future.
They actually call this the productivity bandwagon, and they make a pretty compelling case that it's often a myth.
Yeah, they're saying technology isn't inherently good or bad on its own. It's all about who's controlling it, whose interests it serves, and how it's actually being used in the real world.
And they use some pretty striking historical examples. Remember how you mentioned being fascinated by surveillance tech? Well, they actually start with Jeremy Bentham's panopticon.
Oh, right. That creepy prison design where the guards could theoretically see every single prisoner at any given time. I thought that was just a weird historical footnote.
Well, Acemoglu and Johnson, they argue that even technologies we think of as normal today, like apps on our phones, can be used in ways that benefit the powerful, often at the expense of workers.
Okay, so that's a bit unsettling, but I get it. It's not really about the technology itself, it's how it's wielded, right? But let's go back in time a bit. One of the things that really struck me was their example about medieval Europe. I think we often romanticize that era, but they paint a very different picture.
Right. I mean, we think of inventions like water mills as these huge steps forward that made life better for everybody. But Acemoglu and Johnson point out that while those inventions did boost productivity, life for a lot of peasants actually got harder. They were working longer hours under harsher conditions while, the elites were building cathedrals with their newfound wealth.
Yeah, it's a brutal reminder that just because some new technology comes along, it doesn't mean everyone's going to reap the rewards. So if this whole productivity bandwagon thing, if that's a myth, what other examples do they give?
Well, they talk about the invention of the cotton gin. Now, at first glance, you might think, okay, that's great, more efficient cotton production. But here's the thing. It also fueled the expansion of slavery in the American South.
Oof. Okay, that's a tough one to swallow. It really highlights how progress for some can come at a terrible, terrible cost for others, especially those who lack power.
Exactly. And it feeds into this pattern they see throughout history where, rather than leveling the playing field, technological progress often ends up reinforcing existing power structures.
So who are they saying actually drives the direction of technology? Is it just those with the most money?
They argue it's not just about money, but what they call persuasion power. It's about the ability to shape the narrative, influence public opinion, and determine what's considered important or even possible.
That's interesting. Do they give any specific examples of how this persuasion power has actually influenced technological choices?
Oh, yeah, they do. Remember when we were talking about big engineering projects, for example, they bring up the French attempt to build the Panama Canal. Total disaster, right?
Thousands of people died. I always figured that was just bad engineering.
Well, that played a role, but it's more complicated than that. The authors focus on Ferdinand de Lesseps, the guy who spearheaded the project.
He was the engineer.
He was a brilliant engineer, but he was also a master at selling his vision. He had convinced thousands of people to pour their money into this project, even when there was overwhelming evidence that it was doomed to fail.
Wow. So his ability to convince people, even if he was in the wrong, had tragic consequences.
Exactly. And that power of persuasion, it's even stronger today. Think about how the stories we tell about technology, stories often shaped by people with something to gain, how those stories influence everything from government policy down to the choices we make in our own lives. They use those examples to jump into this whole discussion of the Industrial Revolution. So even back in the Industrial Revolution, this persuasion power thing was already shaping what technologies took off. It wasn't just about the inventions themselves.
Exactly. Acemoglu and Johnson argue that the Industrial Revolution wasn't this inevitable march of progress. They say it was shaped by choices. Choices about which technologies to really get behind, and like we've been talking about, those choices often benefited some groups more than others. They dive into two big inventions from that era: textile machinery and the steam engine.
And they use those two inventions as these contrasting examples, right? So textile machinery, it was a game changer, but it mainly automated tasks that already existed. Like picture those huge looms replacing skilled weavers.
Oh, yeah, I can only imagine the uproar over that. Weren't there, like, riots, protests?
Absolutely, the Luddites, that's who we're talking about. They were fighting back against those machines because they saw them as a direct threat to their livelihoods.
It's a good reminder that just because a technology is progressing doesn't mean everyone's lives are going to improve.
Right. And the authors, they argue that textile machinery, it may have made production more efficient, but it didn't really translate to a better standard of living for most workers. In fact, they found this old folk ballad. It was from Lancashire, I think, and it talks about how factory workers were forced to work these long, grueling hours, and they didn't even have time for simple pleasures anymore, like walking in the garden.
Wow. So they were literally singing about the downsides of this new technology. That's kind of amazing.
It is, and it shows that even back then, people were grappling with the social consequences of these new inventions. Now, think about the steam engine. It wasn't just automating things people were already doing, it created whole new industries, most notably railroads.
Okay, yeah. It's that ripple effect, right? New industries, new jobs, new opportunities.
Exactly. And importantly, the benefits were more widespread this time. The steam engine created demand for all kinds of labor, skilled and unskilled, so we see this bigger boost in prosperity overall. Acemoglu and Johnson argue that it's a prime example of how technology, when it opens up those new possibilities, not just automating old ways of doing things, can have a more positive impact across the board.
Makes sense. But fast forward to today, the digital age. Are we making the same mistakes with automation that they made with those textile machines back then?
That is the question, isn't it? And it's something that Acemoglu and Johnson are clearly concerned about. They say we might be missing a huge opportunity with digital technologies. They have the potential to improve life for everyone, like electricity did. But we seem to be so focused on automation and surveillance, and often that comes at the expense of workers.
Yeah, it's like this whole robots are going to take our jobs thing you hear all the time now. Is that what they're worried about?
It's part of it, yeah. But they're especially worried about what they call so-so automation. These are technologies that might increase productivity a little bit, but really they're just about cutting costs and replacing workers. And often they don't even create new jobs that are better or more fulfilling. Think about those chatbots that answer customer service calls now, or those systems that are automating tasks in finance and law.
So it's not just about robots in factories anymore. It's about automation seeping into all sorts of jobs, even those requiring specialized skills. But is there any way to avoid this future where the robots take over everything?
They do offer some hope. They say it's not too late, but we have to make a conscious choice to steer technology in a better direction.
Okay, but how? Give me some specifics. What can we actually do?
They say we need to reclaim the narrative around technology. They argue that for a long time now, big tech has controlled this conversation. We've been sold on this utopian vision of the future without really acknowledging the potential downsides.
It's like we've all been so caught up in the excitement, we haven't stopped to think critically about where it's all heading.
Exactly. We need to start questioning this assumption that all technological progress is good progress. We need to demand a more honest conversation about the role of technology in our lives. We have to start asking, who is this progress really benefiting, and at what cost?
So how do we actually do that? How do we, as individuals, reclaim the narrative? That seems like a huge task.
They suggest supporting media outlets that are willing to ask tough questions, challenge the status quo. They say we need to engage in these conversations, make our voices heard, and hold those in power accountable.
So it's about being more than just passive consumers of technology and information. We have to become active participants in shaping the future we want to see.
Absolutely. And that leads to their next point, which is the need to revive what they call countervailing powers.
Okay, we touched on that earlier, but remind me again. What exactly are countervailing powers?
Think of them as the forces that can stand up to concentrated power and advocate for a fairer system, one where resources and opportunities are shared more equitably. Things like labor unions, consumer protection agencies, those grassroots organizations that are fighting for things like digital rights and a more equitable internet.
So it's about strengthening those institutions and groups that can challenge big tech and fight for the common good.
Exactly. It's about leveling the playing field, making sure that the interests of workers, consumers, everyday people are considered just as important as the interests of corporations and the wealthy.
That makes a lot of sense. But it also sounds like a massive undertaking. What can people do on an individual level to support that kind of shift?
They argue that even small acts of resistance can make a difference. Supporting businesses that align with your values, being more conscious of your data privacy, even just being mindful of the technologies you allow into your life. These are all ways to take back some of that agency, push back against the power that these tech giants have amassed.
So it's about making choices that reflect our values, even if they seem small in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. And that brings us to their final and maybe most important point, the need to rethink our priorities.
Okay, what does that mean? Rethink our priorities as a society.
Yes. Acemoglu and Johnson argue that we've become too fixated on things like economic growth and efficiency as the ultimate measures of progress. And often, that comes at the expense of other really important values.
Like what else should we be focusing on?
Things like social well-being, environmental sustainability, democratic values. They say we need to broaden our definition of progress and start grappling with some tougher questions about the kind of future we're creating.
So it's not just about what we can do with technology, but what we should do with it.
Exactly. We need to consider the ethics, the potential consequences, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. They argue for more investment in things like education, healthcare, and a stronger social safety net to support those who might be most affected by these rapid technological advancements.
So it's about creating a society that's more just, more equitable, where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, not just those who are benefiting most from these technological changes.
Exactly. And they believe that technology, if we use it wisely, can be a powerful force for good. They point to things like renewable energy, advancements in healthcare technology, online education platforms. These are all examples of how technology can be used to make a positive impact.
So it's not about rejecting technology, it's about being more intentional about how we develop it and use it.
Right. And it's about making sure those benefits are shared widely, not just concentrated among a small group of people.
This has been a really fascinating conversation. We've covered a lot: the history of technological progress, the challenges and opportunities of today's world. What are some of the key things you hope our listeners will take away from this?
I hope they feel empowered, like they're not just along for the ride. Technology doesn't dictate the future. It's a series of choices that we all have a say in shaping.
It's a good reminder. It's easy to get overwhelmed by all of this, but Acemoglu and Johnson make it clear that we have more power than we might think.
We do. By understanding the patterns of the past, questioning the stories we're told, and fighting for a fairer system, we can create a future where technology benefits everyone.
Well said. This has been a thought-provoking deep dive, and I know I'll be thinking about these ideas for a long time to come. And to our listeners, we encourage you to do the same. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for a better future. A future where technology is a force for good. Thanks for joining us. So we've talked about the challenges technology brings, but it can't all be doom and gloom, right? How do Acemoglu and Johnson think we can actually steer technology in a direction that benefits everyone?
Well, they're surprisingly optimistic. They actually lay out this whole roadmap for change. And it starts with changing our perspective. They call it reclaiming the narrative.
Okay, reclaiming the narrative. From who?
From the people who benefit the most from the way things are now. The ones who keep telling us this story that more technology automatically equals progress. Acemoglu and Johnson want us to question that story.
Because it's a story we've been told for so long, we just accept it as truth.
Exactly. We need to be more critical. Don't just buy into the hype. Acemoglu and Johnson want us to ask, progress for who? Exactly. And what are we giving up for that progress?
That's a good point. So how do we do that? How do we actually reclaim that narrative?
Well, they suggest supporting those media outlets that are willing to ask the tough questions, the ones who aren't afraid to challenge the status quo. And we need to make our voices heard, have these conversations, and hold those in power accountable.
So it's not enough to just passively consume information anymore. We need to actively shape the conversation.
Exactly. And that ties into their next point about reviving countervailing powers.
Right, those countervailing powers. We talked about those a bit earlier, but give me a quick refresher. What are they again?
Think of them as the forces that can push back against the most powerful and advocate for a fairer system. Labor unions, consumer protection groups, even those grassroots organizations fighting for things like digital rights, a fairer internet.
So it's about strengthening the groups that can challenge big tech and fight for the common good.
Yes. It's about making sure that the interests of workers and everyday people are given as much weight as the interests of corporations and, the super wealthy.
Right, leveling the playing field. It makes sense, but it's also a huge undertaking. What can individuals do to support this shift?
Well, Acemoglu and Johnson argue that even small acts matter. Supporting businesses that operate ethically, protecting your own data privacy, even being mindful of which technologies you allow into your life. These are all ways to take back some control.
So making conscious choices that reflect our values, even if they seem like small things.
Yes. And finally, they talk about the need to rethink our priorities.
What do they mean by that? Like as a society?
As a society, yeah. We've become so obsessed with economic growth, with technological efficiency, and often we forget about other things that are just as important.
Like what? What else should we be prioritizing?
Things like our well-being, a healthy environment, a strong democracy. These are crucial too. We need to broaden our definition of what progress means and really think about what kind of future we're building.
So it's not just about what's possible with technology, but what's actually desirable. What kind of world do we want to live in?
Exactly. And Acemoglu and Johnson argue that we need to be investing more in things like education, healthcare, and social safety nets. Things that support those who might be left behind by all these rapid changes.
So building a more just and equitable world where everyone has the chance to thrive, regardless of their background or their relationship with technology.
That's the goal. And they believe that technology, if we're smart about it, can actually help us get there.
I like that. It's not about rejecting technology entirely, but being more intentional, more thoughtful about how we develop and use it.
Yes. And making sure that the benefits are shared widely. Everyone should benefit, not just a select few.
This has been a fascinating conversation. We've covered so much ground today. What are some key things you hope our listeners will take away from our deep dive into power and progress?
I hope they feel empowered, like they're not helpless in all of this. Technology isn't this unstoppable force that's going to dictate our future. It's a series of choices, and we can all play a role in making those choices.
That's such a good point. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, but Acemoglu and Johnson remind us that we have more power than we think.
Exactly. By understanding history, by questioning what we're told, by fighting for a fairer system, we can create a future where technology works for everyone.
Well said. This has been incredibly thought-provoking. To our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into power and progress. We hope this conversation inspires you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for a better future.